Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Guardsman by J. David Baxter, narrated by A. W. Miller. Prologue. Darian had fallen into a trap. He had known it for several minutes, but hadn't wanted to admit it to himself. The spell he was casting had been found in the citadel of one of the ancients. He would have sworn he was the first to enter that chamber since it was abandoned, but this spell had all the hallmarks of a trap set by Laurel and Loman, the supposed gods of the Blood Mage cult. He had opposed them and worked to limit the spread of their influence. Until now, they had failed to kill him. Until now. Somehow, they had slipped this spell crystal into the treasure hoard. It was supposed to grant all the stored knowledge and memories of its maker. That had been too tempting for Darian, and the perfect bait. Worse, overconfidence in his own abilities meant he had begun casting the spell from his own home, a home just outside the human village of Torrens Wall. There were over 300 innocent people living there, easily within the blast radius of this spell when it detonated. The spell pattern had started out just like any other memory spell, but it had gone on well past the point it should have ended. As one of the Reyandil, he had more mana to draw on than members of the younger races. Even so, he was running dry, and there was no end in sight. He had prepared mana batteries to supplement his own capacity, knowing this might be a possibility, but even that didn't look like it would be enough. That was when he had realized this was a trap. Now he was desperately trying to think of a way out. Unfortunately, there was a reason every child was taught never to alter a spell once they began casting. The results were almost always tragic, and the more powerful the spell, the more catastrophic the outcome. He had put more mana into this spell than any he'd ever cast. Enough that if he lost control, it would utterly destroy the nearby village and everything within several leagues. The world hadn't seen destruction on that scale since the blast that had leveled the capital of the Bane Elves 90,000 years before. And here he was, about to cause a tragedy on an even larger scale. He felt a grim sense of dread as he began to draw on the second-to-last mana battery. He wasn't worried for his own life. He could cut off the spell mid-cast and teleport away to safety before the explosion. But that would doom all those innocent lives. Or he could do what no mage should ever do. He could alter the spell pattern mid-cast. It would cost him his life. But if he could make the alteration skillfully enough, he just might be able to save everyone else. It was the only option he could take. As he began to tap into the final power source, his one aim was to try and send the power of the spell somewhere else, somewhere safe. He was desperate as he changed the spell pattern, but he channeled with a skill beyond anything he had ever managed before. As the last battery emptied, he knew it still wasn't enough. With a final agonized cry, he reached into himself and consumed the matter that made up his own body to fuel the last turns of the altered pattern. Their trap had been too tempting, too perfect, and they had won. But perhaps if the alteration was successful, someday they might discover their victory wasn't as complete as they hoped. As the echoes of his scream died, the only remaining sound was the shattering of the delicate crystal as it hit the floor, breaking into 1,000 tiny shards. Chapter 1. Nate grabbed his Psychology 101 exam booklet from the teacher's desk and breathed a sigh of relief. It was marked B+. That was really good, considering how hard the final had been. He was taking the class mostly to knock out one of his required science credits. Mostly. "Good luck next semester, Mr. Keller," the professor said as she looked up at him. Then she smiled and added, "Don't forget that I want to see you in a couple of weeks if you have that dream again. I want to hear your account while it's still fresh in your mind. I find it fascinating that it happens on such a predictable schedule." He sighed and responded, "Thank you, Professor, but please call me Nate, and I haven't forgotten." He had made the mistake of talking to her about the dream a few weeks ago. It had been happening to him every year since he was 10 on precisely the same date and time. June 6th, exactly at 5 a.m. The thing that had scared him enough to talk to his psych professor was that the pattern had suddenly changed in January, and now he had it every month on the 6th. It was almost enough to make him worry about his sanity. That was the one good thing to come out of his meeting with her. She had assured him that while it was very unusual, having repeating dreams on a particular date every year was not completely unheard of. Then she had tried to dig into his past like a real psychologist. She began asking him if he'd had some trauma as a child on that date, perhaps even something buried so deep he couldn't consciously remember it. He was sure it wasn't something like that. He had even talked to his parents when they were still alive, and neither of them could think of anything important that might have happened on that date. He stuffed the exam booklet in his backpack and gave the professor a wave as he headed for the door. As he stepped out on the sidewalk into the slight May breeze, he ran a hand through his hair and considered where to go next. That had been his last exam for the spring, and now he was free until the fall semester started. He had planned to spend his summer taking classes, but the ones he had wanted were either full or hadn't been offered during the short summer terms. That left him with nothing to do but brood over the dream and why it was suddenly getting worse. He briefly considered calling one of his few acquaintances as a distraction, but they were all heading out of town for summer break. Even if they weren't, he doubted he would have shared something as personal as a dream. He knew he should be building relationships. It was what college was supposed to be about. Unfortunately, since starting last year, he had struggled to keep up with his class load, and the most profound connections he had made were a few study partners from his classes. It was a bit depressing in its own way when he thought about it. As if saved by the bell, his phone rang, and he answered it with some relief. It was his sister Elizabeth. He was suddenly worried, wondering why she was calling in the middle of the day. "What's up, Els? Everything okay?" He must have sounded worried, because she responded,
"Chill, I just wanted to check on you. Did it happen again?"
So much for being saved from thinking about it. "Yeah, and it's starting to freak me out some. It's never happened on a day other than the 6th before, and today was the second day in a row. First it went from happening once a year, then once a month, and now it's happening every night." He frowned, then added, "Hang on, what are you doing calling me in the middle of a school day?" She laughed at him.
"Are you kidding? School let out 3 days ago for the summer, and I'm bored already. Auntie M is about to head out to go canoeing for the weekend with her friends, and none of my friends are free. I was hoping you might want to come get me and take me to do some shopping."
There was hopeful pleading in her voice. He looked to the heavens, as if there might be some merciful God to save him, but the only thing there was a scorching Texas sun, promising a blistering triple-digit afternoon. Deciding shopping with his sister might suck marginally less than being alone with his thoughts, he gave in. "Fine. Do you need me to pick you up, or is Aunt Marcy going to drop you off at my apartment?"
"You pick me up, please. Auntie M said she was going to pick up Ted on her way to meet up with the rest of her people."
There was a sour note in her voice at the mention of their aunt's friend. "Fine, I'll be there in half an hour. I just got out of my last class." His frown was back. Nate wasn't a fan of their aunt's friend, not since Els had mentioned that he tended to stare at her too much. Unfortunately, Aunt Marcy really liked him, and they had been friends since elementary. Even so, he had offered to have a chat with the guy, but Els had said no. As protective as he felt for her, his little sister was able to defend herself. He still winced thinking about the guy who had tried to harass her in middle school. The principal hadn't done anything, so she had taken matters into her own hands. Even Mr. Tanaka, their karate instructor, had beamed with pride when he learned of her actions. After their parents had died, she had been devastated, and Nate had focused all his efforts on being there for her and protecting her. That was 5 years ago, and she was a normal 17-year-old now with all the angst and drama that went along with it. He hated to admit it to himself, but despite being in high school, she was probably a better adjusted person than he was now. His mind spiraled around those thoughts on the drive to their aunt's house. That dream had really put him in an introspective mood. He hated the dream for the nervous feeling it gave him, but at the same time, it was like a splash of color in an otherwise drab painting that was his life. Not that he didn't like his life. He was comfortable, and once he finished his business degree, he would be well set for money. The knowledge that he was learning in school about investing, combined with his inheritance, would mean he and Els would never have to worry. He knew that should make him feel great. There were so many people in the world who would envy his position. but deep down, it felt hollow. His parents would be proud of him. They had wanted him to get a degree and be successful, and he was confident he would be. But he had a nagging feeling that he was just going through the motions, not really living. All the kids he knew at school were out partying this weekend, getting drunk and celebrating the end of the semester. But here he was, being boring. Not that he really wanted to be drunk and puking in the toilet of some frat house. That lifestyle didn't really appeal to him. He just felt like he was missing out somehow. When he pulled up, Els was already waiting for him on the front porch, backpack in hand. She ran to the curb and jumped into the passenger seat, dressed fashionably in shorts and a t-shirt. Her long auburn hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she frowned at his car with the usual displeasure.
"Aren't you ever going to get a new car? We'll be sweating our asses off this afternoon."
He smirked at her. "Beggars, choosers, you know which one you are." Not that he didn't agree with her privately. He'd kept this hunk of junk running for years. It should have been retired to the graveyard a long time before he'd gotten it. It was a 1991 Honda CRX, mostly held together by Bondo, duct tape, and his own sweat. He didn't particularly like to sweat, but he was proud of what he'd managed to accomplish. Besides, every time he worked on the car, it reminded him of his father, who had bought it as a project car to work on with him just a year before the accident. She rolled her eyes at him.
"Jeez, bro, it's not like you don't have the money to get something nicer. You never spend a dime. You've got a problem, you know."
She was smiling, but there was a hint of seriousness in her tone. He laughed. "I don't see you turning down the ride."
"Fine, whatever."
She turned her head as if angry, but he could see the grin on her face. They argued about the car all the time, and she knew what it meant to him. "You staying at my place while Aunt Marcy is out of town?" Normally he might have minded, but right now the company would be a welcome distraction. With the cosmic timing of irony, Els picked that moment to turn back and ask,
"So, have the dreams changed at all? Have they gotten worse somehow? You sounded a bit freaked over the phone."
He leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes for a second before saying, "Not a single thing has changed about it since the first one I had when I was 10. Mom wakes me up in the dream and tells me to hurry and get ready, that it's almost time to go. Then we're on the porch at our old house, and Dad says he hopes I have everything, because once we leave, we won't be coming back."
"That doesn't sound so bad. Why does it have you so messed up?"
Els was trying to be sympathetic, but it was clear she didn't understand. "It's not the content of the dream, it's the feeling I get from it. Like I'm not ready for something, and like once I leave, I will never get to go back. It makes me anxious and like something's going to happen, but I have no idea what. My psych professor said it was probably my subconscious trying to tell me I need to prepare for something, and it keeps coming back because deep down I know I'm not ready. The problem is I have no idea about what I'm supposed to be ready for." Els was nodding along.
"Yeah, your prof sounds right. I've been reading a lot about psychology because that's what I want to do when I get out of school. I want to help kids with stuff like what we went through after we lost Mom and Dad. It's just the timing of your dream that makes it so weird."
Nate laughed. "Yeah, that's exactly what Professor Lane said. She wants to write a paper about it." Els laughed in turn.
"Ha! My brother, the science experiment."
He couldn't help but grin. "Okay, smarty pants. If you know as much as a college professor, what should I do about it?" She thought for a long moment, becoming serious.
"If your subconscious is telling you to prepare for something, then you should prepare."
"No shit. But prepare for what?" Confusion and frustration were evident in his reply.
"Well, in the dream, you're being told to get ready to go somewhere, like a vacation, right?"
Nate cocked his head, considering. "Yeah, I think so. It seems like it since Dad is standing next to the car like we're about to drive somewhere." She shrugged.
"Well, get ready for a trip and your brain will stop pushing you to prepare for it. What kind of trip do you think it could be? Like camping or a road trip or what?"
He had wondered that many times, but he just didn't know the answer. "I have no idea."
"Well, prepare for them all then. A camping trip would need the most preparation, so why don't you start by doing that, then pick up anything else you might need for a road trip like snacks and drinks."
She smiled as if it was all so obvious. You know I hate shopping, and I know you wanted to get out and go shopping. I smell a conspiracy here. He eyed her suspiciously, then finished. Besides, you know I don't like spending money. She looked smug as she said,
Yes, and I even know why. Probably better than you know yourself.
Seeing his doubtful look, she explained.
You hate spending money because that money was left to us by Mom and Dad, and you feel like spending it means letting go of them.
He just sat there in silence for a long moment, the truth bomb hitting him hard. When he finally spoke, he said quietly, You really will make a great psychologist. Damn. Then he added, But knowing why I don't like spending money doesn't really change the fact that I don't like it. She grinned and waved a hand dismissively.
Knowing and admitting that you have a problem is half the battle.
He thought he heard her mutter under her breath,
One of them, anyway.
He tried not to take offense and couldn't help but laugh. Fine, but I don't see you spending all your inheritance.
True, but that's because I have a plan. You'll only be in school for 4 or 6 years at the most with your boring business degree. To be a psychologist or psychiatrist, I'll be in school for at least 8 years, maybe as much as 12 before I'm out and have a job. I don't want to be buried under student loan debt and spend the rest of my life paying it off.
His sister was smart. He had always known that, but this level of forethought for her future was more than he had expected. Okay, fine. Let's head to that big camping place up at 75 at the Stacy Road Shopping Center. They should have everything we need, no matter what kind of trip it is. Privately, he wondered if this exercise and retail therapy would have any effect on the damned dream. He really hoped it would. The thing was really scaring him with its sudden change in frequency. Having it once a year hadn't really been that bad. Weird, but not frightening. But the way it was speeding up like the music in that 70s shark movie, it was building the tension in him and winding him up for something. Chapter 2. Nate was afraid of what he had just agreed to when they walked into the store. It was massive, and they carried everything from guns and ammo to boats, tractors, and anything in between. Seeing the apprehension on his face, Els grabbed his arm and pulled him along toward the camping section, making him push the cart. He didn't even know where to start, so Els took charge.
We'll just get the basics and some extras that might be good to have in an emergency.
He followed, mutely watching as she started throwing items into the cart. A sleeping bag, emergency blanket, water bottle, titanium spork, emergency matches, ferromagnesium fire starter, and on it went. By the time they were done with the camping section, he surely had over $300 worth of gear in the cart. Holy crap, I don't need any of that stuff. His gut was clenching at the idea of spending that much money frivolously. She frowned and gave him a pointed stare.
Look, you can always return this stuff in a couple of weeks if it works, but this is your brain. It's going to know if you're cheating and not taking this seriously. If you want your subconscious to believe, then you have to believe.
He sighed and had to admit she had a point. Okay, if we're really going to do this, then I guess I should get some hiking boots and some clothes, too. Being an outdoor-type store, they had tons of camo, and that sparked an idea. With a glimmer in his eyes, he headed straight for the hunting clothes. I could get the gray camo ones and do a Stargate cosplay at the convention next year. Then I wouldn't feel so bad about spending the money. At least I'd get some use out of it.
Nerd.
She laughed, but she was more amused at his sudden excitement than over his choice.
Whatever you have to tell yourself.
He gave her a mock glare and then laughed as well. Okay, I admit it. I may be a business major, but I am a closet geek. She considered for a second.
I'll bet you could order a mission patch online for the shoulder, and it would be a perfect cosplay. You just need to get a black t-shirt to go with the camo.
An hour later, he had everything he needed. It had set him back just under $500, not too bad, really. And while he wouldn't admit it to Els, he really did like the SG-1 style uniform. Their father had been in the Air Force when they were little, and Nate had seriously considered joining up to pay for college. He still wished he could, but hadn't been able to bear the idea of Els being alone with just their absentee aunt as her only family. They had been forced to move from their home near Houston to Dallas after their parents' deaths, and they'd had a hard time adjusting to the new city and losing all their childhood friends. She might be fine now and have a group of good friends, but he was still her only real family left. Even now, he hadn't completely given up the idea of serving like his father had. If he signed up for the ROTC program next year, he could go into officer training right out of college. That would give him both the opportunity to serve and a jump start on his investing career. He would just have to have the discipline himself not to blow his money. He almost laughed aloud at the thought. Who was he kidding? He hated spending money, and Els was right. It was because of some misguided feeling that it was betraying his parents' memories. He could admit that now, but it didn't change how he felt, and he said as much aloud. Els put a comforting hand on his shoulder.
You don't have to spend the money, not ever really, but I think you know Mom and Dad would be more pleased knowing you spent it all and were happy than hoarded it and made yourself miserable.
She giggled.
Besides, you know if Mom were here and heard this conversation, she'd drag you around that store until you found something that caught your eye, and then she'd twist your arm until you bought it for yourself.
He smiled sadly, thinking about that. Yeah, that's exactly what she would have done. A few minutes later, they were driving past one of the buildings across the street from the camping superstore when something caught his eye, and he abruptly pulled into a parking space.
Hey, what the?
She asked angrily.
I almost dropped my phone.
What you said before gave me an idea, and I want to check this place out. He pointed to the sign above the entrance that read Gold and Silver Exchange. It looked like a pretentious boutique store specializing in buying and selling precious metals. They even had a security guard standing outside the door in the heat, which was ridiculous. Nate gave the man a sympathetic look as they got out of his old rust bucket of a car. The look the man gave him in return was less friendly, but he didn't say anything, only held the door open for them. They weren't dressed for a store like this, and they certainly didn't seem like the clientele it would have, but the salesman gave them a friendly smile anyway. Nate wasn't intimidated, but he could tell the man's suit probably cost 10 times what his car was worth.
How may I help you today, sir?
The man didn't look like he had much expectation of a sale, but he was very courteous. What's the gold and silver spot price today? Nate only had the basic business classes so far, but one thing he had learned last semester was that gold and silver almost always went up in value when the stocks were down and went down when the market was up. The market was definitely riding high over the previous 6 months, making it an excellent time to invest in precious metals, something his secret geek heart had always wanted to do. The idea of owning gold and silver coins, just like in the books and games he had played, was suddenly very appealing. The man raised an eyebrow and then checked his computer console.
Gold is at $1,373 currently, and silver is at $14.02 per ounce. While the prices are lower than they were for the last few years, they are always a good investment.
Els was looking at him curiously, but he just smiled at her and said to the salesman, Would you mind showing me what you have in gold and silver rounds? He had learned about how gold and silver coins were collected from his parents. He had never been allowed to play with them for fear of scratching them up and lowering their value, but he had loved to stare at them as a child and imagine. Perhaps because of that, he had talked to one of his professors last semester, and they had had a long discussion about precious metals investing. The salesman was wrong. Metals were not always a good investment, but now was the time to buy. The prices were as low as they had been at any point in the last decade. He might have to hold the coins for a couple of years to get a decent reward, but he had no doubt they would eventually go up again.
Are you really going to buy gold and silver coins?
Els whispered quietly to him while the man was pulling sample coins from the display cases.
I know I said you have a problem with not letting go of your money, but I didn't mean for you to go crazy.
He gave his sister a smile. You were right, and despite how this may look, I'm not losing it. You know, Dad invested about 5% of their savings in gold and silver. I've still got the coins in my safe at the apartment. I'm just going to add to them. Looking at the coins, most of which had some variant of Lady Liberty on the face side, he shrugged. Besides, you said it yourself. I have to be serious about being prepared. I would only spend a percentage of my savings on this, but it will be a good investment. Trust me, this is what I've been going to school for. Remember, never let your money sit just in a savings account. Inflation means money sitting in the bank is losing a minimum of 3% of its buying power every year, and that's when inflation is low. When inflation is high, your savings are losing even more value by just sitting there, so you should always be growing your money by investing it. That's how the rich always get richer. They don't let their wealth sit idle, doing nothing. They put it to work for them." Els rolled her eyes.
Listening to you geek out about investing is almost as bad as the fandom stuff.
Despite her words, he thought she was taking him seriously. She was always surprisingly good with her own money. Almost an hour passed while they were in the store. To the salesman's shock and utter delight, Nate ended up buying very nearly $15,000 worth of coins, ranging from 1-ounce gold coins down to 1/4-ounce silver rounds. The store manager personally came out, thanked Nate for his business, and processed the transaction, which required a call to the bank to know that it was legitimate and not block the sale. Once they were outside, Els frowned and looked disappointed.
For a minute, I was thinking you were spending just to buy something because it would make you happy and that it showed you were letting go. But I see through you. You just turned the cash into something you were even less likely to spend, and you're holding on to Mom and Dad's memory even tighter.
She shook her head reprovingly. He nodded and forced a grin. "I know, and you aren't wrong, but it is something I wanted. It just also happens to be a good investment." He tapped the side of his head. "Plus, I can't trick the old brain. I have to do it right like you said. But don't worry, it may take a year or two, but from everything I learned in school, I should be able to make at least a 50% return on the coins when I sell them, or even more if I'm patient." She looked doubtful.
"I'll believe that when you actually sell them, but I am glad you see the problem. I worry about you, you know."
The conversation fell off at that point, Nate not knowing how to reply. He couldn't help it. He knew she was right. Unlike Els, he'd never made a new group of friends here, and other than karate, he hadn't had anything but school in his life since then. He watched TV, played a few computer games, and read books, but other than that, he had become locked into his solitary existence. He snapped out of those depressing thoughts as they drove past the car dealership. All that Els had said was true. He really did have a problem spending his money, but there was something that he had always wanted. Nate exited the highway and made a U-turn under the next overpass. He was going to buy something, not because he really needed it, but because Els was right. Their parents would have wanted him to enjoy his life, not suffer through it. And his dad meant for this beater of a car to be a temporary thing to get him started and teach him vehicle maintenance. He wouldn't have wanted to see Nate and Els sweating every time they had to drive somewhere. His sister's eyes got big as they pulled into the Toyota dealership.
"You're kidding, right?"
Seeing the serious look on his face, she added,
"Holy crap, Nate. First the gold and silver coins, now a new car? You don't have to go overboard just to prove something to me."
He chuckled at her worried expression. "I'm not doing this to prove anything. You were right, though, and I've been an idiot for not seeing it before. Besides, you're 17 now. You need a car of your own so you can escape Aunt Marcy's house whenever you need." Els looked confused for a moment, then she made a face.
"Oh, you mean you are giving me your old car?"
"Yeah." Buying the new truck accomplished 3 things at once. It would convince his subconscious that he was serious about preparing for a journey. It would give his sister something to drive. Last, but not least, it was a step toward facing his psychological issues about not spending money. Even the thought of spending this much made his stomach queasy with butterflies. 3 hours later, when they had finished the last of the paperwork and the salesperson had shaken his hand, he had tossed his old keys to Els. "You'll have to drive her home, but first, let's go get something good to eat." He gestured to his beloved old Honda while he walked toward his brand-new Tacoma pickup. He was still feeling nearly ill over spending so much of his inheritance, but he had to admit to himself that he was looking forward to driving the air-conditioned truck. To celebrate the end of the semester, and hopefully the end of the dreams, they ate at Nate's favorite steak place. He thought to himself, what's another $100 after spending over $45,000 in a single day? When they finally got home, he tried on his new Stargate cosplay and even strapped on his father's 9mm Sig Sauer pistol to see how it would all look.
"Dang, Nate, you could be an actor on the show dressed like that. All you need is the team patch on the shoulder and you'll be set." "Of course, they won't let you in the con with that."
She pointed at the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?